Hi, everyone, and welcome to Trade and Tariff Tuesdays. We're back with another installment of Avalara's webinar series discussing the Trump administration's tariffs and their impacts on trade compliance. My name is Ashley, and I'll be your host. Before we dive in, I just have a couple housekeeping items. A friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal or tax advice. On your screen is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review that. We are recording today's event. You'll receive the recording later today. The console you're looking at can be customized. Feel free to move or resize the windows. The additional resources section contains a lot of great related resources, including the slide deck. There are several ways to engage with presenters and fellow attendees today. First, if you have any questions, please submit them using the Ask a Question box. We will save time at the end for Q&A. You can also submit troubleshooting questions there. Second, you can join our attendee chat. There is an icon at the bottom of your screen with chat bubbles. Click that and it will pop up on your screen. We encourage you to introduce yourself, network, and discuss today's topic. Third, you can react to the presentation by clicking the emoji icon and reacting. We've seen some of those come through already. And then lastly, a reminder that this webinar is designed to be quick. We're just scheduled for 30 minutes and interactive, so it is not eligible for CPE credit today. All right, let's meet our presenters. Today we are joined by 4 members of the Avalara team. First, we have Greg Reed, General Manager Cross-Border, Shane Bogdan, Director of Sales Cross-Border, Patrick Frith, Senior Director, Growth Cross-Border, and then we have George Francis in the chat to answer your audience questions as the Senior Director of Global Marketplaces. So thanks all for being here to speak and to help answer some questions. That is all I have for housekeeping. I will pass it over to Shane.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley, and thanks everybody for being here. For our repeat individuals joining, thank you so much. This is another we're setting more and more records here. This is week 5 of ours. We have over 1,000 people on here, so really appreciate the folks that continue to come on here and see value. As I've always mentioned before, if there's other topics you want us to address, etc., please feel free to move forward. Please feel free to submit anything that you'd like us to review. So I'm going to kick things off here in terms of a question. It's a new question that we're posing here. What bipartisan request was urged to Congress in 24 regarding cross-border trade, which remains relevant in 2025? I'll give everybody a couple seconds here before I provide any sort of commentary on this, because it is top of mind over the past few weeks here and since the beginning of February. All right, let's see where people are at. Okay. Majority of you are correct here. 58% grant U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, authority to demand more documentation for de minimis shipments. So if you are a repeat individual who's continuing to jump on here, you'll see that we're constantly talking about de minimis. Last week's question was about what was 24's number of de minimis parcels imported to the States, which is 1.34 billion. We wanted to pose this question back up, though, because this is a bipartisan topic, and it has been right now for over a year. Several bills are currently with the House right now. Most recently, one went into play last week from Linda Sanchez on the 5th, trying to address still what are we to do with the amount of de minimis parcels entering the U.S. So yesterday, March 17th, was the deadline for comments on CBP about the de minimis entry changes that were proposed on January 14th. So if you haven't seen those, I highly recommend it. But a lot of this goes back into the pieces of ensuring there's appropriate data, documentation, and HS-10s on all of these de minimis parcels moving into the States. So we'll kick this off again as our normal. Why the whiplash? Well, the U.S. is considering significant policy and trade changes that primarily driven from curbing fentanyl and illegal immigration. And we've already seen over the past month, 5 weeks now, basically this is disrupting supply chain, trade relations, etc. This is in the topic of new tariffs, removal of de minimis, as I just mentioned here, retaliatory actions, and overall sweeping changes still not yet announced as everybody awaits for the April 1st date. So our timeline continues to grow week over week, and it's amazing what has actually been what's been occurring here. So I may graze over this a little bit for folks that have been on this previously, but we'll start on February 1st because this is really
we'll be here all day if we go through every one of these.
Exactly. But February 1st was really the date when all of this started kicking off, of the announcement of 25% tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and then additional tariffs on China, as well as the elimination of de minimis exceptions. So again, those parcels coming into the States under $800. Well, on February 3rd, this created retaliatory tariffs on Canada. And by the end of that day, which was a crazy day, it was decided that this was going to be delayed for 30 days until March 4th. February 4th comes along, additional retaliatory tariffs from China. And on February 7th, going back to the de minimis piece, the theme here is that the U.S. then did reinstate de minimis parcels for China. And this was due to primarily the fact that we do not have adequate systems in play, quote unquote, to process this volume of parcels under $800. So we need additional systems. I just mentioned the legislation that's on the House from March 5th. Part of that goes into the whole piece of how do we put adequate systems in play if we were to make this change again of removing de minimis. On February 10th, it was announced that on March 12th, which is a few days ago, there would be additional 25% on aluminum and steel. And then on February 13th, we continued to see additional voicing on reciprocal tariffs. On the following 5 days later, on the 18th, it was announced that on April 1st we're going to start getting some sort of direction in terms of what do these reciprocal tariffs mean. There's been a lot of speculation currently right now in the market. Everybody doesn't really know what this specifically means. We're hearing about segmentation on specific industries, and this is going to be changing. But again, no guidance has really been provided on this front. On the 25th, we issued additional requirements for inbound parcels from China to require that they include the 10% and 25% duties on the inbound parcels coming through, that they're appropriately assigned on those parcels as they come through CBP. Again, additional language, verbiage, et cetera, on Canada and Mexico, stating that these things will be coming into play March 4th. And then, again, a lot of language and mixed messaging across a variety of social channels and news outlets of what does this all mean, March 4th, March 12th, et cetera. The following week, again, the 30 days following the March 4th pause in terms of those 25% tariffs on China and Mexico coming into play. Leading up to that date, the president continued to say that we're moving forward with it. The cross-border team, ironically, was all in Canada on the date of March 4th when the new 25% tariffs came back into play for Canada and Mexico. And within 48 hours, these were then put into pause, with the caveat being on March 6th that said that basically anything that was not under USMCA agreement would be charged the 25% additional tariff. Anything that qualifies for USMCA will not. So just to double click here, just in terms of the USMCA component of this is, I provided some stats last week, but USMCA compliant goods only cover 38% of Canadian imports and 50% of Mexican imports coming into the US. So the goods need to originate from the US, Mexico, or Canada to be substantially transformed within those countries as part of that COO mandate. And non-originating goods, some examples they provided were electronics, machinery, foreign source fruits, coffees, and additional non-USMCA manufactured good like appliance and textiles. They would be charged the additional 25%. On March 7th, then, we continue to go through on the reciprocals of Ontario now saying that they were going to be charging 25% more on electricity that they're providing to 3 states. And then on March 12th, obviously the steel and aluminum tariffs came into play. Canada did pause the additional tariff on the electricity coming into the States, but then the European Commission continued to state if anything comes into play on April 1st, we are also going to provide retaliatory tariffs. So, Craig, I'm going to switch it over to you because we got 3 slides here of a timeline Can you sum it up for us? Where are we at right now?
Wow. Okay. So if you're keeping score at home, I'm going to go with what I thought I'd do is talk about what applies to all countries. So, or most countries anyway, on March 12th, the aluminum and steel tariffs of 25% went into effect. So that applies to most countries. And then applying to most countries as well, what Shane mentioned, on April 2nd, we're going to hear about the retaliatory tariffs. So, you know, the EU's already said that they're going to retaliate as well, but nothing has happened with the EU or the rest of the world. The efforts so far have really been focused on China, Canada, and Mexico. So looking at those three countries, China now has a 20% tariff, which went into effect on February 4th. The administration has said they're going to add another 10%. There's no date for that yet. China's retaliated primarily on energy and agricultural products and machinery products. So it's been a pretty targeted retaliatory response from China. So again, China's 20%. Canada and Mexico are both at 25%, except for goods that are covered under the USMCA. So for Mexico, that's about 50% of their exports, and for Canada, it's about 40%. So it's important to remember that the 25% is still applying to the rest of the goods. And also, as Shane mentioned, Ontario was originally going to put a 25% tariff on 3 states. They pulled that back when it was threatened to go up to 50% on aluminum and steel. But Canada's also reciprocated. So there's now about 60 billion worth of goods that are being targeted by the Canadian government. They're very specific. I won't go through all the details. Very specific kinds of goods targeted mostly to Republican states, not surprisingly, and those are 25% tariffs. Mexico has not retaliated yet. There's still a response coming, which I would expect would probably happen post April 2nd. So long story short, we're kind of in a state of stasis until April 2nd. Barring any more news headlines coming out on a daily basis. Let's jump to another poll question here. Very curious to understand for the folks that are attending, are you thinking about this, or is your concern primarily on an import or supply perspective, so goods you're bringing in on the supply side, or is it more from an export or international sales perspective? So, or both equally. We're interested in how you're thinking about that. So if you could go ahead and answer that question, we'll give you a couple of minutes here. All right. You know, Shane mentioned something really important. A couple of things. One is it's really important. We see this consistently in the webinars we've done, that folks misinterpret point of origin from country of origin. So country of origin is what really determines the tariff. So you need to make sure that it's where it was manufactured. There's rules of origin that determine whether you can call it, you know, from US, from Canada, from China, et cetera. But it's really where the product was made that matters. And also, obviously, the de minimis is the other shoe that hasn't dropped yet. So let's go ahead to the results. Yeah, interesting. So I actually would have thought that it would be more on the import supply side. That is a pretty high percentage, but both equally is a bit higher number than I would have thought. So it looks like, you know, it's a combination of import, export, but more an emphasis on the import side, which is a very interesting result. So thanks for that, folks. All right, let's keep going here. So, you know, I'm Canadian. I live in Toronto, and I can tell you that the response, it's not just tariffs, right? So all of the American brands, liquor, wine, spirits have been pulled off many of the Canadian store shelves as part of the Canadian response, I guess you could say. The retaliatory tariffs are going to target and will have a pretty chilling effect on the bourbon industry, on the wine industry. There's a lot of different industries that are going to be affected. But the other thing that's really happening up here, and that I'm noticing is that as you go into stores, there's a lot of buy Canadian messaging across all kinds of different goods and grocery stores and etc. So it's been a pretty broad response, and I would expect that Canada won't be alone in that if something similar takes hold in the EU, for example, or the UK. So it has repercussions beyond just tariffs, which is obviously unfortunate. All right, let's keep moving.
Yeah, so I'll pick it up here, Craig. Whilst the administration slug it out, increasing tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, reciprocal tariffs, it obviously has an impact on supply chains and businesses. We speak to companies and customers day in, day out, all day, and we hear the pain, we understand the pain, and the big question is, can I keep up with all these changes? It's fast moving. Every day there's a new headline. The next day there's another headline. Can I keep up with it? And what we're seeing, the impact it's having on real supply chains, we've summarized them here. So shipments getting held up in customs. Back in February, if you remember, when the de minimis was dropped for 2 days from China origin goods, we saw a huge backlog of shipments in gateways around the US, which couldn't move on. They couldn't clear because duties had to be calculated, duties had to be paid before the shipment could then move on. There's challenges in terms of the penalties and the fines. Will I qualify for a penalty or fine if I'm out of compliance? I suppose legislation is in place to impose penalties and fines if you're out of compliance. And this means data, getting your data correct and accurate, specifically your HS classification codes, because that is the start of everything. That then determines whether you're on a list, 301, section 301, for instance, if you're on a list of punitive goods, and then subsequently, the HS code determines the duties and taxes that need to be paid. So if the data is inaccurate, then yes, you are potentially you're subject to penalties and fines. Overcharging, undercharging. This is a common one we hear. Again, getting the HS code incorrect will lead you to either paying too much duty or too little duty, both of which are bad consequences for your business. If you're paying too much, you shouldn't be paying too much. Your profitability of your goods reduces, or the cost to your customers increases. And if you're paying too little, then you've obviously you're avoiding duty, which is another problem for your business. And then ultimately, all of this wraps up: shipments delayed, penalties, fines, paying too much, paying too little duty. It all leads to ultimately a bad customer experience. And in some cases, if you're calculating incorrectly at checkout, it can lead to cart abandonment. So you're not alone if you're feeling these pain points, because over 50% of the customers that we speak to are feeling one or more of these. So on to the next polling question. This is one that we track every week. We've got some historical information. So I'll just quickly run through it. Given all the changes that we've seen since the beginning of February up until today, are you planning to adjust your supply chain due to the impending global trade changes, tariffs, duties, regulations, in any of the following ways? So we've got a few options there. I'm going to flick it over so you can interact. And yeah, we'll give you a few moments to plug in your answer. I don't know about you, Shane, but when we're speaking to customers, it's top of mind. It's the first item on the agenda. These changes that we're unprecedented changes that we're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the questions revolve around, there's so many news sources now of where are they actually getting the content from? How are they staying up to date? Not to plug Avalara itself, but we do have several pieces of content. We'll provide the links following this slide, but we have an amazing team that is staying up to date in terms of what the latest changes as much as humanly possible. It's amazing our chain's going on and off on an hourly basis every time a new tweet is out there or anything that's coming out from the government. So I think that's one of the biggest pieces, though, Patrick, is just the confusion in the overall market of what's true, what isn't true, and what are these rates currently applicable of.
Great. So let's have a look at the results. Okay. So I'm interpreting them as quickly as everybody else is here. So we see over 25% are thinking of diversifying suppliers, manufacturers outside of China to reduce risk. This has been a consistently this answer. We've seen it consistently, where you're having to look at your supply, the origin of your supply, because of the implications it may have in terms of tariff, and very soon the de minimis challenges, which we're going to experience, I think, here in the US.
You know, the other really jumps out at me here too, Patrick, is and what we're hearing in the industry is a lot of uncertainty. Just, you know, and that's the large I don't know number, which is, you know, maybe paralysis until you really understand where everything's going to land, which is obviously not unexpected.
Some of the sources have been calling it the green light, red light, you know, outside of the whiplash of what's on, what's off, what's on, what's off. And they're kind of, as you mentioned, Craig, in this paralysis state before making any sort of decisions. What can stick longer than 48 hours?
Yeah. So here is this. I mentioned we're tracking it. So here is the tracker. We've been measuring this since mid-February. So you can see there has been a steady decline in I don't know yet. We just saw 40-something% on today's poll. So that's remaining sort of consistent. And you're absolutely right. People, they know they need to do something because of all this change, but because it changes every single day, they're not too sure where it'll land, and therefore which action they're going to take.
But I think too, sorry to jump in, Patrick, but I think too that you know, you think about the April 2nd date, nobody knows, you know, what tariffs are going to be applied to the rest of the world. So if you're thinking about your supply chain, well, you know, maybe you're getting your goods from Singapore or Taiwan or the EU or a place that hasn't been hit yet with the tariffs. So I can imagine that drives a lot of uncertainty too.
For sure, yeah. So yeah, it's a question we'll continue to track. We're fascinated to see, you know, what people are thinking, what organizations are thinking in terms of their next steps. Okay, and I'll just...
Can I jump in here real quick? We got a couple of questions that I think are great, so I'll let the panel of experts ask this. So Rick asked the question, can you clarify if electronics made in China, imported into Canada, and fulfilled into the USA under Section 321 will be tariff-free? So made in China, imported to Canada, and then shipped into America.
Yeah.
The key...
Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I was going to say the key part of that is the first three words, made in China. It doesn't matter ultimately where it's imported from, in this example from Canada, but it was made in China. And that has to be declared. It doesn't matter if it's been around the world 3 times before it got to the US, it was made in China. So therefore, punitive, fentanyl, all those other stackable duties apply to that shipment.
Yeah, and that's a common one. We get questions like that where folks think that by transshipping through another country, let's say you go from China to the EU into US is another example, that you're not subject to tariffs because it's coming from the EU, which currently has no tariffs. Answer is no, it still does have tariffs because it's made in China.
Yep. Yeah. So just despite what may be happening, you know, tomorrow, the week after, the big one, of course, 2nd of April, you can rest assured that Avalara, we're keeping on top of it. We have a huge team, over 250 content engineers who monitor changes and put those into our systems. A couple of examples was the de minimis elimination on the 4th of February from China origin goods into the US. De minimis, you remember, went down to 0 for 48 hours. We immediately applied that de minimis at 0, and therefore duty calculations were applied to any shipment at any value. Then it was rolled back, if you remember, 48 hours later on the 7th of February, and we immediately switched back the de minimis to $800. So our customers knew that their calculations were compliant. They were collecting the correct amount of duty, even though it was only for a 48-hour period. They were collecting the right amount of duty from any online sales or any declarations they had to make when they got to the US. Similarly, March the 4th, I'll never forget it. We were in Toronto. We woke up to see that it was in place. We quickly, as Avalara employees in Toronto, we quickly checked our systems internally to make sure that 25% had been applied from Canada to the US, and there it was in the system. It had gone into effect at midnight. So you can go about your business knowing that Avalara are on top of these changes, and our systems reflect those changes in real time.
Yeah, and Patrick. Yeah, and Patrick, even a more recent one was last week that it was coming down to the hours of. There was the talks of, well, is Canada, because they put the tariff on electricity to the states, was their 25% on steel and aluminum actually going to be 50%? And Craig and I are on a Slack chat with all of our content engineers of what is it going to be, and everybody's sharing articles. Well, we were quick to easily adapt as needed and have the 25% in as they rolled back the 50%. But no, this is what we do. This is how we help. Three core areas that we help on here is our calculations, duties and taxes, classifications. We're talking about de minimis all the time because it is inevitable. They are going to start requiring additional facets of information on parcels inbound to the US, including HS10s. We provide a variety of services to help you maintain those HS codes and also classify those goods. And then content. We have ample sources around trade content that we can help with to help you make the informed decisions on what can ship, what can't ship. Are there PGAs on certain things? Are there 301 duties versus 232s on other duties? We're able to provide these sort of these insights. So let's
a couple of. I was gonna say, sorry. Go ahead. I'll let you do this. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. Feel free. We always like to leave this up for folks to chime in if they'd like to speak with somebody on these things. But feel free to go ahead, George.
Yeah, so a couple of questions. Michelle asks, we're currently shipping spare parts for ice cream manufacturing equipment using an HS code. Will this code be affected by retaliatory tariffs? If it's going to McDonald's, you're 100% safe. Trump loves McDonald's. You'll be fine. So, but unfortunately, we need some more information. We can follow up after that. I think we had another great question in here. Shipping containers. This is actually a great one because, as we know, most shipping containers end of life in the U.S. They're made in China, delivered once. We have this glut of shipping containers. The question is are they going to be assessed a duty on the container itself? Obviously, the cargo inside. This is really how you import and really a broker question. So as you think about that, if that container is designed to be here and is put in the manifest as a one-time move, most likely will remain as a dutiable item. So that's something that your broker can talk to you about. And then do you think, this is a great question for the experts here, do you think they will create exceptions?
Well, so the exception, so the executive orders always come out with no exceptions, right? So there was some carve outs for the big one was the China de minimis. If we remember, they were adding taxes at the same time the de minimis. There were some carve outs. So there were humanitarian, charitable donations, very, very small percentage, but generally sort of humanitarian related are carve outs and do get exceptions. But other than that, no, we can expect to see countries negotiating on the side with the US. So when reciprocals come in place in April, there's already noise about the UK, Japan, some other countries negotiating their own side deals. So reciprocals won't hit that hard. So I think we can expect to see exceptions, but I would have thought they're being negotiated at the moment, and we're obviously not privy to those negotiations.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the public record that Trump has said we'll tariff the way we're tariffed, no more, no less, quote unquote. So that would indicate, because there are areas where there are no tariffs. If you take that at its face value, that would indicate that the USMCA, for example, would continue to be in effect. But things like dairy, which are, have tariffs coming into Canada, would have tariffs going into the States as well, for example. So I think it may be a lot more targeted, which is going to be a lot more complicated, but I would expect to see some exemptions that sort of follow the lines of, you know, what is exempt going into other countries, if that's true, that it's going to be tit for tat. Oh, here's a question. Do you expect USMCA goods to remain tariff-free post-4/2?
Yeah.
You know, I hate to say something on public record. My personal opinion is something will be done with the USMCA. I think there's just too much at stake with the automotive industry and other industries that have been operating under the USMCA and supply chains that'll be impacted. So my personal guess is yes, something along the lines of the USMCA will go into effect. But what that looks like, I can't really say.
If we did not get to your question, we will follow up post webinar. So I do want to make sure there's a couple questions that need a little more information before we can get.
Yeah, as usual, we're out of time, and it goes by quickly, and there's a lot to share. So there is a lot more information that we have up on our website. So I invite you to take a look at that. Any last parting thoughts or comments, fellas?
It's a roller coaster. It's fast moving. We're here every. We've just set the schedule. We're here every Tuesday throughout April. We'll see what happens for May. But yeah, tune in for more updates next Tuesday and all the Tuesdays throughout April.
Yeah, and I highly recommend following the blogs that we have because these are updated as quickly as possible based upon all of the news that actually sticks. So tons of content that we're putting out. But we appreciate the continued growing audience, and thanks for attending.
Yeah, thanks, folks. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Just a couple of things to close out. Thanks to the presenters for doing this weekly update. I will just close this out. So thanks for attending. You will receive a post-event email later today with a link back to this consult where you can access the recording slide deck and those additional resources. We do hope you can join us again next week as we continue this weekly series. The post-event email will have instructions on how to register for those upcoming sessions. So thanks again for joining, and this concludes today's webinar.